before the court is concerned. It was highlighted by Mr. Mahesh Jethmalani, who was appearing for the two children, that the will that has been executed, the will of their father, which has been executed here, is something that seems to be forged. It was read in a haste in that particular meeting at the Taj Hotel, and there seems to be suspicious circumstances because there was no talk of the will until that particular meeting at the Taj Hotel took place. The executor of the will and Priya Sachdev Kapoor have taken a defense that this will was something that came up to them through Mr. Dinesh Agarwal, who's said to be in fact one of the directors of Arias Investments Limited, and also is somebody who is a witness to this particular will itself.
So it's interesting, Ananya, that you highlight that this is, on one side you have Priya's version. On the other hand, you've also in fact spoken to Sanjay Kapoor's sister. What is it that you're learning with regards to the other side of the family, whether it is Sanjay Kapoor's sister or the mother, remember, who were at the forefront of those allegations that surfaced with regards to Priya Sachdev in fact forging the family will?
We had spoken to, in fact, Miss Mandira Kapoor Smith a few weeks ago when this whole family feud had actually broken out. And she, as far as Karishma Kapoor is concerned, had stated that they are having good terms with Karishma Kapoor. She's somebody who's held the family together, the two grandchildren of Miss Rani Kapoor, which is Samaira and the other one from Karishma Kapoor, who have now filed this plaint before the Delhi High Court. All of them speak in one line that, this is a will that is forged in nature. And it is by Priya Sachdev Kapoor and people associated with Priya Sachdev Kapoor in order to take control of the Sonacom star and the 30,000 crore worth of empire that Mr. Sanjay Kapoor had carried forward from his father, Mr. Surinder Kapoor. Not only carried forward, but had also expanded the legacy of his father, Mr. Surinder Kapoor. Akansha.
All right, Ananya, stay with me. We in fact have managed to access, with your help, that document which has been submitted by the children of Karishma and Sanjay Kapoor. This is what Samaira and Kian in fact have presented in terms of their viewpoint. Most important is the aspect with regards to how they were seeking a Portuguese citizenship. To take you through that particular point, in fact, it clearly goes on to say that there's representation with the Portuguese Agency for Integration, Migration and Asylum, or rather AIMA, for the purpose of family reunification and renewal requested by his...
CNN-News18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions.
Good evening, you're watching Brass Tacks. I'm Zakka Jacob. We're coming to you live from the CNN-News18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions. There seems to be a bit of a thaw building up between US President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi. After the opening gambit last weekend, today there were further exchanges between the two leaders on social media. President Trump posted that he will soon be speaking with Prime Minister Modi in the next few days and weeks, and that the trade negotiations will continue. Those negotiations had been stalled after the imposition of the secondary tariffs, or the oil tariffs. Prime Minister Modi responded to that again on social media, saying that the negotiators will speak soon and that he takes President Trump's positive view of the India-US partnership. Does this break the frostiness and the iciness of the last few weeks? What happens to the secondary oil tariffs? Because there are two parts to this story. One, of course, the first set of reciprocal tariffs of 25%, which is what the negotiators have been doing the back and forth on. And the second one is the secondary oil tariffs, which were imposed by the Trump administration on the 27th of August. So let me just bring you up to speed with what has been the sort of nature of conversations over the last 3 or 4 days between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. All of it happening on social media. There's not been a physical meeting or a phone conversation yet. US President Trump, in fact, took to social media, the platform called Truth Social, which he owns. He announced that India and the United States will continue negotiations to address the trade barriers between both countries. He also went on to say that he looks forward to speaking with his very good friend, Prime Minister Modi, in the upcoming weeks. And he feels that certainly there will be no difficulty in coming to a successful conclusion for both countries. Returning the sentiment, Prime Minister Modi replied, India and the US are very close friends and natural partners. He said he's confident that the respective trade negotiations will be able to pave the way for unlocking the limitless potential of the India-US partnership. Prime Minister also went on to say that our teams are working to conclude these trade discussions at the earliest, and I'm also looking forward to speaking with President Trump. We will work together to secure a brighter, more prosperous future for both our people. In fact, this is something that was alluded to when Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal sat down with News18 editor-in-chief Rahul Joshi last week, and he said that he's still hopeful that by November of this year, they can clinch an interim trade arrangement.
Let me rewind a little bit and, come to what you've been dealing with, and you've been at the center of all of it. Till about July 6th or 7th, things seem to be going fine with in our negotiations with the US. Then in a matter of weeks, we had a tariff of 25%, then another 25% on top of that. What went wrong in these few weeks?
Well, I think the US-India relationship is one of the most consequential relationships on the globe today. We are two very large democracies. We believe in the rule of law. We are allies and friends for long. We have had certain blips, like we had the sanctions post the nuclear tests in 1998.
Yes.
I look at this only as one more situation which will pass as there's a deeper understanding of the reality of the situation, and I'm very confident this relationship will only strengthen in the years to come.
And how soon do you expect things to resolve?
It could happen soon enough, it may take some time. Irrespective, we will continue to be friends, we will continue to be engaged with the United States, and I'm sure we will continue to have greater economic relationships, defense relationships, greater interest in a safe, fair and secure Indo-Pacific. In some sense, it's a very multi-dimensional relationship where we contribute to each other's economies in different dimensions and will continue to do so.
Now, here's how this trade tussle has played out so far. This is a timeline or a recap of how this has gone from, really being in the deep freezer to now showing signs of a thaw. On the 30th of July, Trump announced the 25% tariffs will be imposed on India. This is the reciprocal tariffs, the first set of tariffs. A day later, he said that the Indian economy is dead. Of course, not very, very kindly to the Indian economy, which is the fastest growing large economy in the world. Then on the 6th of August, and this was the big shocker, this was the real bolt from the blue, he raised the tariffs to 50%, saying that India is being sanctioned or punished for importing Russian oil. In fact, India was the only country on which the secondary tariffs still exist. A month later, following the SCO summit in Tianjin, Trump said that he seems like he's lost India to deep, dark China. But then very soon he shifted his stand. The very next day he said that India and the United States have a very special bond and that he's not worried about losing India to China. Prime Minister Modi then reciprocated that. He appreciated and endorsed the sentiment expressed by President Trump. And now President Trump says that India and the US, the trade negotiations will continue and that an amicable solution will be reached soon. Prime Minister Modi again responded to that by saying that he's optimistic about the ongoing negotiations. Again, something that was asked of Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, when she sat down with News18 editor-in-chief Rahul Joshi last week.
Now that tariffs with the US are at 50%, what is the likely impact on the GDP going forward?
But with the reform like this, many of that should be offset. It's a dynamic situation where you're moving from one to another with newer players coming in, newer factors coming into play. We will come out with something to handhold those who are hit by the 50% tariff from the US. This has been said earlier. I've met up with the delegations when I went to Chennai in recent past few days. Global diplomatic world is astonished that that kind of an expression is being used against India. And that will have people in the diplomatic arena to respond or to deal with. But what hurts me more is when those very expressions are being justified in India. Oh, don't you all know, don't you, I mean, you know, dirty, unwashed Indians, you don't understand what this expression means? This is how, this is explained. Who wants these explanations from Indians? as much as you want everything produced in India for Atmanirbharta. You should have something of a self-respect. If somebody is saying, all of us in one voice should respond to it, rather than have a few of us justify it by saying, don't you all understand it? Are you a part of the imperialists?
So is there a thaw on the cards between Modi and Trump? I want to go across to Fareed Zakaria, host of GPS on CNN. Thanks very much, Fareed, for speaking with us. So at the recent SEO summit in Tianjin, you had these pictures of Prime Minister Modi, President Xi Jinping of China, President Vladimir Putin of Russia, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. Of course, those pictures got a lot of circulation in the American media. Do you think it was because of the Trump tariffs and the oil tariffs, the pushback, and sort of the deterioration of ties between India and America that sort of forced the Indian Prime Minister to go to China for the first time in 7 years and sort of break bread, if you will, with Xi Jinping?
I think that there's no question that the United States has committed a strategic blunder. These tariffs are in any case a bad idea from an economic point of view, but they're particularly bad strategically. The idea of having India have the highest tariffs in the world, and by the way, also Brazil. These are key pivotal states that the United States and the Western world has been cultivating for the last 3 decades. Brazil as an anchor in Latin America, India, of course, as an anchor in Asia, South Africa as an anchor in Africa, and all three have been subjected to this strange combination of toxic rhetoric, high tariffs, and kinds of ideological demands. So I think the whole thing has been badly misplayed. It's important not to exaggerate the shift in Indian policy. Prime Minister Modi did go to China for the first time in 6 or 7 years. He attended this summit, but he did not attend the military parade.
Yeah.
India is still negotiating with the United States, as it should. And look, whoever's fault it is and whatever American errors, India needs this deal. And so I think that the imperative on the Indian side is to try to figure out how can it make this happen? Because to put it very bluntly, India needs the deal more than the United States does.
So India needs the deal more than the US does. But having said that, Fareed, there was a certain strategic logic over the last 2.5 decades as to why India and America became close strategic partners. And that is that if there is any country in the world that can challenge America over the next many decades, it has to be China. And if you needed a counterweight to China here in Asia, it has to be India. What Trump has done with his tariffs and all these aggressive rhetoric that we're seeing from the White House, he's completely upended that strategic logic. He's turned it on its head. Why do you think he's done that? Why do you think he's pushing India away from the America corner, as it were, to the China and Russia corner?
I think sadly, we are not right now going through a very strategic period in American foreign policy. I don't think there is a particular strategic rationale to what Donald Trump has done. It seems as very often nowadays in Washington that the new American policy is a product of a combination of personal slights, annoyances, ideological preferences of one man. And so from the best I can tell, in US-India negotiations about the tariffs had been going quite well until the Indo-Pak clash took place. And at that point, Trump decided he wanted to claim credit for having ended it, which is all part of his obsession with winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And the Pakistanis were happy to indulge him and nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And the Indians were understandably unwilling to essentially, pretend that he was the key broker here. And that seems to have annoyed the hell out of him. The Pakistanis played this well, and they were able to flatter him even more. Perhaps there's something going on the crypto front with his family.
Yeah.
But it does seem as though those are the kind of issues that have shifted Donald Trump's policy towards India, not any dramatic rethinking of American strategy. Trump still says that the key issue for the United States is how to deal with a rising China, He still talks about the importance of assembling a coalition of countries against it. It's just, so it's a mixture of emotionalism, narcissism, incompetence. Frankly, there's no way to make much sense of it. But as I say, the Indians have to take the world as it is, and India still needs good trading relations with the United States.
The real sort of bolt from the blue, at least is the way India sees it, was the secondary tariffs, the oil tariffs for importing Russian oil. And India feels that, look, it's the only country that's been slapped with these tariffs. No other country. In fact, China imports more Russian oil than India does, and yet China does not face any of these secondary tariffs. So is there a feeling in the Trump administration that, certainly in the strategic community, there's been a lot of pushback against these secondary tariffs, but is there a way in which Trump can sort of walk back on these secondary tariffs? Because that seems to be the real pain point, even more than the first set of tariffs, which are the reciprocal tariffs.
I think Trump can walk back on almost anything. I mean, that's part of the flexibility of his ideology. He doesn't really believe in anything, and therefore it's easier for him to move back on some of these things than I think any American president. The tariffs on the secondary tariffs, secondary sanctions, do seem just part of a negotiating strategy of raising the cost for India, because it's an odd way to get at Russia, to punish India more than you're punishing Russia.
Yeah.
Russia is itself exempt from all tariffs. Russia has been showered with praise by Donald Trump. He keeps talking about what a great relationship he has with Putin. He lovingly displayed a photograph of him and Putin. I think in Trump's mind, and this is a very important, kind of misunderstanding that Donald Trump has about the world today. In Trump's mind, the U.S. and the Russian leaders meeting reminds him of, Nixon meeting Brezhnev, Reagan meeting Gorbachev. There's a sense in which he still thinks the world is being run by summits between the American president and the Russian leader. But that world has gone away. Russia is a small country in many senses. The economy is the size of the Netherlands or Italy. Yes, it has a big army and it has a veto in the Security Council, but it's a very dysfunctional country. So I think it's in some ways a strange overestimation of Russia, but you see this in Trump, right? With the Russians or the Chinese, whom he regards as strong, he's very careful and cautious. He likes to bully countries with whom he has leverage. And he thinks with India, he has leverage. India needs the American market more than America needs the Indian market.
So just on the war itself, what happens to the Russia-Ukraine war itself? Because strangely, what seems to have happened since the Alaska summit about 3 weeks ago is that the fighting has only intensified from the Russian side. They're now targeting Ukrainian civilian buildings, apartment complexes, government buildings. It's become much more aggressive in the last 3 weeks since the Alaska summit. And India, willy-nilly, has been sort of dragged into this as a stakeholder in this war. India needs peace between Russia and Ukraine because the secondary tariffs will continue until there is a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. So what do you reckon will happen in the war itself on the ground? And what do you make of this further aggressive tactics we've seen from Russia since the summit?
Well, as you point out, the Russians have been escalating. So far, Trump's strategy towards ending the war in Ukraine has really failed on every front. His basic strategy, let's be honest, was to coddle the Russians and to squeeze the Ukrainians. And I think he thought that by squeezing the Ukrainians to make all kinds of concessions and announcing those concessions, Ukraine would not be a member of NATO. The United States would not send any troops to protect Ukraine as a deterrence force after the war. Russia could keep all the territory it had conquered. All these concessions Trump made unilaterally, preemptively, before the negotiations even began, in the hope that this would lure Putin to do a deal which would be a favorable deal on his terms. Well, he managed to bully the Ukrainians, but the Russians still aren't willing to come to the table in any serious way. The Russians still aren't willing to end the war because Putin wants to totally dominate Ukraine. And I think Donald Trump needs to understand that the pressure he needs to put on Russia is not this bizarre indirect pressure of getting the Indians to stop buying Russian oil, which other people would buy if India didn't buy. It is to put military pressure on Russia, to give Ukraine the arms, the information, the satellite information it needs, to mount an even more vigorous defense of its territory. And when the Russians feel the pressure on the battlefield, that is when they will most likely come to the negotiating table. The indirect pressure of doing it through this very strange way of trying to get the Indians to buy less Russian oil is not going to make much of a difference. The Chinese will buy it, the Indonesians will buy it, it'll be bought on the black market. Nobody, 3.5 million barrels of oil are not going to disappear on world markets.
So in terms of where things was asked about it by a reporter in the White House, and he said, I have great ties with Modi. I wouldn't be worried about the Indo-US relationship. Modi sort of reciprocated that on social media, saying he shares and endorses President Trump's positive view of Indo-US ties. Do you see just in the last few days a sort of a thaw appearing on the cards between Trump and Modi?
I think it can be fixed, and I think you're right, Zakka, in noticing that those statements by Trump, which clearly were a softening of the Trump position. I think that this is his game. He pushes hard. I mean, it's the kind of continuous drama of the Trump presidency. You have crazy demands, which then get softened. The tariffs initially are announced at crazy numbers, and then they come down. What India has to decide is, can it play this game? It's clear what the game is. You come to Washington, you flatter Trump, you make a series of commitments, wild numbers, which are completely nonsensical and never going to be followed through on. But Trump doesn't care, because he's running a reality television show, not the presidency of the United States. And what he wants to hear is a big Oval Office announcement where he can say the Indians are buying $100 billion of our defense equipment. They're going to invest $100 billion in the United States. No one will follow those. No one will track that. Almost all those announcements that have been made by Masayoshi Son in Japan, by the British, by the Saudis, none of them have come through in anything like the numbers that were announced. But Trump wants a big Oval Office moment where he's praised, where there are promises made. And India is somewhat reluctant. I think India is somewhat more old-fashioned in the way it approaches foreign policy. And so the question is, can India play along? Can India do the kind of put forward the spectacle that Donald Trump wants? And if it can, I think that there's probably a deal to be had, because Trump just wants to be able to say, I forced a great deal. And I'm the greatest deal maker in the world, and everyone, quietly applauds while knowing in their heads maybe this is not all what it appears to be.
All right, Fareed Zakaria, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Fareed Zakaria, host of GPS on CNN, joining us here on Brass Tacks. In Nepal, the collusion of corruption and nepotism has produced a deadly cocktail. Producing the unprecedented protests that we saw, it brought down a government in under 48 hours. One such case that added fuel to the fire was a hit and run that typified this elitist mindset, this Nepo kids mindset. Hours after the ban on social media apps back on the 6th of September, an official SUV carrying the Koshi province minister Ram Bahadur Magar struck an 11-year-old Usha Magar Sunuwar outside a school in Lalitpur. And you can see the CCTV footage there. That young girl is running for her life. It shows her being flung onto the roadside. And the worst part is the vehicle just drives away. While the minor survived the crash, the incident triggered anger across the country. That was the incident that really got young people's goat and brought them out into the streets in the tens of thousands. And that is believed to have been the real flashpoint which started off these Gen Z protests, which came to a head on Monday and Tuesday. And eventually, by the end of the day on Tuesday, it brought about the fall of the KP Sharma Oli government. But these Gen Z protesters have now laid out a series of political and social demands. They have 5 big conditions. They want sweeping reforms in the governance of the country. They want investigation into the assets that have been looted by politicians over the last many years. They've demanded the immediate dissolution of the current House of Representatives of the Nepalese Parliament. The protesters say they have lost public trust with the existing cabal of politicians. They want an amendment or a complete rewriting of the constitution with active participation from citizens, experts, and the youth. Remember, the Nepali constitution is barely 10 years old. It was adopted formally in 2015, conducting new elections after the interim period, ensuring that the elections are independent, it's fair, and it's based on direct public participation. The establishment of a directly elected executive leadership, the investigation into assets that have been looted over the past 3 decades, as well as illegal properties that have been acquired by these politicians to be nationalized. Structural reform and the restructuring of 5 fundamental institutions: education, health, justice, security, and communications.
Congratulations guys, सबैजनालाई नेपाल सरकार ढलिसकेको छ. The youth has won the protest, won over the country. The future is ours. हामीले गरेर सबैजना मिलेर हामीले गरेर हामीले सक्यौं हैन. I really want to thank every one of you. We are still safe here, and we'll be moving towards अब सिंहदरबार, अब माइतीघर. Thank you so much, guys. Really, I just cannot. It was a dream, guy. You change ko lagi, and finally, we made it happen.
Nepal's Gen Z protesters now want the former Chief Justice of the Nepal Supreme Court, Sushila Karki, as the head of the interim government. Justice Karki made history after she became the first ever female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Nepal. She served in that role between July of 2016 and June of 2017. She began her legal career in 1979 after completing her law education in Biratnagar. She's known for her zero tolerance when it comes to corruption. She earned great respect for her integrity while she was a judge and then eventually the Chief Justice. She delivered landmark rulings, notably enabling women to pass citizenship to their respective children, a right previously that was restricted to just men. Of course, while she was a Supreme Court Justice, she went on to give rulings on a number of corruption cases. There was even an impeachment motion that was moved against her, which was later unsuccessful. So the question now is, can Justice Sushila Karki be the interim Prime Minister? There is no such constitutional position in the Nepalese constitution. What sources have told investigations editor Manoj Gupta is that as per the Nepalese constitution that was adopted formally in 2015, there is no official position for an interim Prime Minister. In fact, the interim Prime Minister has to be from the sitting members of Parliament. The person who's been chosen as the interim leader, Justice Karki, is not a member of Parliament. In fact, she's a retired jurist. The army, of course, is favouring Gen Z and their demands. It's the Gen Z that picked Justice Karki to become the interim leader of the country of Nepal. But they're also trying to find legal ways, some kind of legal cover for the president, Mr. Ramchandra Paudel, to go ahead and formally appoint Justice Karki as the interim leader, who will, of course, lead a caretaker government and then eventually pave the way for elections. The Nepalese president, Mr. Paudel, has limited discretion in whether or not he can appoint anyone in case he decides to go ahead with Articles 76 and 77 to justify the appointment of a neutral figure, not a politician, not an existing MP or a member of parliament, if no party can then form a majority in the Nepalese parliament. In this case, the president has the option to declare emergency in the country and thereby give legal cover to the appointment of Justice Sushila Karki as the interim leader of Nepal. There's also a second scenario that's possible, and that is if the army decides and it forces the political parties to reach a deal, then the political parties can nominate Justice Karki as the new interim leader of Nepal. I want to go across to Koshraj Koirala. He's the editor of Republica Daily, joining us live from Kathmandu. So tell us a little bit more about why the Gen Z protesters have settled on Justice Karki. What is going to be her remit? What is going to be her mandate? Just in terms of what the way forward is for Nepal after these rather unprecedented scenes that we've seen over the last couple of days.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think it's not clear yet, and negotiations are going on. And changes are also, there are different groups of changes group, and they're also trying to force consensus among themselves. Like a section of changes, they prefer Balinsa, the mayor of Kathmandu metropolitan city, while a majority of JNGs, they are preferring former Chief Justice Susila Karki, partly because of her, strong stance against corruption. And during her tenure as Chief Justice, she had played a very important role. And some other candidates are also in the fray. Like some JNGs are also talking about Kulman Gising, who actually headed Nepal's state utility, Nepal Electricity Authority. So few other candidates are also there, but then majority of the JNGs, they are with Susila Karki. But in terms of mandate, it's not clear. As you rightly mentioned, Constitution does not pave the way for, appointing someone outside the parliament. So President Ramchandra Paudel is in negotiation with other political parties as well. And this afternoon, Nepali Congress and CPN-UML, the two largest parties, they have issued a press statement saying that any way out to the current political impasse should be found within the constitutional bound. That means the constitution should not be violated in a way, because as you mentioned, there are different ways to make sure that to give
Okay.
legal cover to any such appointments. So in terms of mandate, as you were just asking, basically GNGs, they were very much frustrated with misgovernance, rampant corruption, and failure of political parties to deliver their promises. And this was not the first time. Earlier there was pro-monarchy group. There were also
Yeah.
so many youths. They were also like the frustrated youths that had joined in the protest in earlier in March. So basically, their demand is that politicians are having all the luxuries and all. Their children are having good life, but the ordinary people, they could not have any meaningful changes even after the promises made by political
So,
parties
so one of
in
the things I
different.
noticed, Mr. Koirala, about the five demands, the five major demands placed by Gen Z, they want the dissolution of the current parliament, they want fresh elections, direct elections to directly elect the people's representatives. Are we looking at any kind of timeline? How soon this new interim government can come together? What sort of timeline and road ahead is Justice Karki, assuming that she's the one who will head the interim government? How much of a timeline do they have to conduct these elections? And what's to say that those elections will be free and fair? Because in the past, in Nepal, there have been, on numerous occasions, allegations of elections being rigged.
I think you are right, and it will take, I think, a relatively longer time, because you need to be able to force consensus with, including these political actors, not just GNGs. Like if you just ask me, like even today, the Nepali Congress and CPN-UML, they have the strength to bring 500,000, even 1 million people in the street of Kathmandu. If these JNGs who are negotiating with the president and the army chief, if they are not able to force consensus with the existing political parties, the major political parties, that will not be widely accepted, solution. So the thing is, first JNG has to come to a conclusion. They have to force consensus among themselves, and then that consensus has to be, negotiated with the political parties. And once political parties also agree to their way out the solution they propose, then only the process of forming interim government and election and everything begins. Otherwise, I don't think it will just take place anytime soon.
All right, Mr.
It will
Koirala.
take
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Koshraj Koirala is the editor of the Republica Daily, joining us live from Kathmandu. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Let's try and go across to a Congress Member of Parliament, Mr. Manish Tiwari, who has spoken about this issue. In fact, you tweeted earlier today, Mr. Tiwari, that you find it naive to think that it's a coincidence that what happened in Dhaka last year and what's happened now in Kathmandu are coincidental, and it's just a spontaneous protest, this Gen Z Nepo protest that was being undertaken by the Nepalese young people. You think it needs to be probed as to whether it was spontaneous or whether there were some other interests at play. Why do you say that?
Well, Zakka, thank you very much for having me on your show and your channel. It's been a while, and it's always good to have a conversation with you. Look, what is happening in Nepal is absolutely worrying. When you contextualize it in the context of the question that you asked as to whether what happened in Bangladesh last year or what happened in Sri Lanka earlier in 2018, were there organic, homegrown protests against legitimate malgovernance, aspirations that young people have, unemployment, income inequality, or is someone tapping into this angst and anger, given that South Asia has a huge youth demographic bulge, and then leveraging it and mobilizing it in order to bring about undemocratic regime change is something which needs to be gone into very deeply. And how come that South Asia suddenly has become the epicenter? Because this weaponization of social media and its use in order to channelize and tap discontent in a particular manner, which is then targeted at bringing about regime change. Sheikh Hasina had to flee in the most ungraceful circumstances. Prime Minister Oli had to step down. A former Prime Minister's wife was burnt to death. You had finance ministers and other ministers being chased and stripped in the streets of Kathmandu. It's something which should worry us since we are the preeminent power in this region.
No, the two follow-up questions to that. One, if you feel that it needs to be probed, it needs to be investigated as to whether this is spontaneous or whether there is some vested interests at play. The issue is every time India thinks of that in its neighborhood or wherever else, and particularly so in its neighborhood, there leads to some kind of local resentment against India, displaying big brother attitude, so on and so forth. All of these populations, the students in Kathmandu, the students in Dhaka, the young people in Sri Lanka, would all have us believe that this is spontaneous. And the more Indian diplomats or Indian media speculates on whether there is something more to it that meets the eye, it only fuels more anti-India sentiment there. So how do you see that difficulty, that balancing act, as it were?
Well, that's a brilliant question. And yes, it's a paradox because obviously every country guards its sovereignty very, very closely. However, if you were to accept it on face value, then the obvious question would be Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, who is going to be next? So that's why I'm saying, for example, this Nepo kids trend in Nepal, which became the sine qua non of this entire movement, which led to the current impasse that all 77 districts in Nepal are completely out of control. The armies had to step in. Now, was this an organic, homegrown trend against some rich, brash kids actually posting some very obscene and ostentatious pictures which flash wealth when a bulk of the Nepalese young people have to go out of the country in order to find employment? Or was someone actually using this in a very calibrated and clinical manner in order to create instability, because there are forces which benefit out of instability in nations? And for India to become absolutely placid and languid and quiet and say, well, this is a matter of state sovereignty, we will accept whatever is happening in our neighborhood, I'm afraid it doesn't work like that, because ultimately what happens in Sri Lanka, Nepal or Bangladesh or Bhutan, or for that matter even Pakistan, has implications on India.
So just getting some breaking news. Prime Minister Modi has spoken with the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and expressed his deep concern at the attacks that happened in Doha yesterday. India condemns the violation of the sovereignty of the brotherly state of Qatar. This after Israel launched an airstrike against Hamas negotiators in Qatar on Tuesday, expanding its military actions. This is the first time that Israel has directly struck a target inside sovereign Qatari territory. In fact, it happened right in the heart of the capital, Doha. Qatar has acted as a mediator alongside Egypt and the United States in the talks to try and get a ceasefire going, as well as to try and put an end to the war in Gaza. The Qatari Prime Minister has thanked Prime Minister Modi for his phone call and for his token of support, his appreciation of support. The Indian Prime Minister, of course, expressing dismay at the breach of sovereignty of a sovereign and brotherly state like the state of Qatar, with whom India has very deep and historic ties, as well as very deep trade ties. And this is the first time that they have spoken after the attack that happened last afternoon, right in the heart of Doha. Tensions in Ukraine spilled over into neighboring Poland as several Russian drones violated Polish airspace. Poland described this as an act of aggression, perhaps the biggest since World War II. In response, Poland invoked NATO's Article 4, marking the first time that a member of the NATO alliance has used weapons against Russian objects in its territory. The incident came during Russia's largest aerial assault on Ukraine since the war began in February of 2022. Here's the complete breakdown of what happened in Polish airspace today.
Remnants of Russian drones have been found in several villages across Poland, a chilling reminder of how tensions escalated in Europe on the 10th of September. Polish and NATO forces shot down drones violating the country's airspace during a Russian aerial attack on neighboring Ukraine. 4 airports in Poland, including the Chopin Airport in Warsaw, were closed due to military activity. Fighter jets were scrambled early in the morning as more than a dozen drones entered Polish airspace over a course of 7 hours. Polish airspace has been violated many times since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. In March, Poland scrambled jets after a Russian missile briefly passed through Polish airspace on its way to a target in western Ukraine. In 2022, a missile that was likely fired by Ukraine to intercept a Russian attack landed in Poland, killing 2 people. But it was not to the scale that was witnessed on Wednesday. It was the first time that NATO had to confront a potential threat in its airspace.
Of course, whether it was intentionally or not, it is absolutely reckless. It is absolutely dangerous. But as I said, the full assessment is ongoing. And to Putin, I mean, my message is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine. Stop the escalating war, which he is now basically mounting on innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure. Stop violating allied airspace and know that we stand ready, that we are vigilant and that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that up to 4 of 19 Russian drones were shot down, and it's the closest that the country has come to an open conflict since World War II.
Ale ta sytuacja, która stawia nas wszystkich bliżej otwartego konfliktu, bliżej niż kiedykolwiek po II wojnie światowej. Mamy pełnoskalową wojnę za naszą granicą, ukraińsko-rosyjską, ale mamy już coś, co przekracza granicę zwykłych prowokacji u nas, na naszym niebie. I może dzisiaj trzeba znowu bardzo głośno i wyraźnie powiedzieć. Polska ma dzisiaj wroga politycznego, który nie kryje swoich wrogich zamiarów za wschodnią granicą.
There was a wave of condemnation from European leaders and NATO member states.
Last night, Russia launched drones into Poland in an unprecedented attack. I've been in touch with the Polish Prime Minister this morning to make clear our support for Poland. We will stand firm in our support for Ukraine. With our partners and through our leadership of the coalition of willing, we will continue to ramp up the pressure on Putin until there's a just and lasting peace.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called it an extremely dangerous precedent for Europe and called on Russia to feel the consequences. It was echoed by EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen.
Putin's message is clear, and our response must be clear too. We need more pressure on Russia to come to the negotiation table. We need more sanctions. We are now working on the 19th package in coordination with partners. We're particularly looking at phasing out Russian fossil fuels faster. We're looking at the shadow fleet and at third countries.
NATO members like Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia are most nervous about Russian aggression given their close proximity.
No one is safe here. No one is safe in the region, no one is safe in Europe and within the alliance. Because those incidents are very close to the situations when everything is going to escalate and where everyone will be involved into something that we want to avoid. And the key to avoid that and the key to prevent this from happening is protection and pressure on Russia. This is how we see the situation. Till we don't have the confirmation that there was intentional attacks. If there was intent to do the harm to allied nation, allied territory, then we have to go to the plans and to the books that we've written for the case of crisis and war.
The Kremlin dismissed the allegations as groundless.
Слушайте, руководство ЕС и НАТО ежедневно обвиняют Россию в провокации. Чаще всего даже не пытаясь представить хоть какую-то аргументацию.
But its close ally Belarus said it tracked some drones that lost its course because they were jammed. Belarus claimed their forces had warned their Polish and Lithuanian counterparts about unidentified aircraft approaching their territory.
По имеющимся каналам взаимодействия в период с 23 часов 9 сентября до 4 утра 10 сентября наши дежурные силы и средства обменивались информацией о воздушной радиолокационной обстановке с дежурными силами и средствами Польши и Литовской Республики, тем самым оповестив их о приближении неизвестных летательных аппаратов к территории их стран. Это позволило польской стороне оперативно отреагировать на действия беспилотников, подняв в воздух свои дежурные силы.
Poland said that some of the drones came from Belarus, where Russian and Belarusian troops have been gathering for war games starting on Friday. Russia and Belarus's large-scale military exercises, known as the Zapad drills, have raised security concerns in neighboring NATO member states. Tens of thousands of Russian and Belarusian troops will be engaged in maneuvers close to Poland and Lithuania. Russian and Belarusian troops will also practice with the Oreshnik nuclear-capable missile systems. Poland is shutting its border with Belarus in response to the major Russian military exercise.
Less than a year after taking office, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba stepped down from the country's top office this past weekend. Ishiba's resignation has been a long time coming, particularly after the 2 consecutive election losses for the ruling LDP party, after which the ruling party became a minority in both houses of the Japanese parliament. While a premiership turnover is very common in Japan, Japan has had revolving door of prime ministers through the 90s and 2000s, Ishiba's LDP party has entered one of its weakest phases in recent times. So the question is, what next in Japan's political scene, in its political musical chairs? Who is likely to succeed Ishiba as the next Prime Minister of Japan? Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba of Japan announced Sunday that he planned to resign as Prime Minister, plunging his country into a deep political crisis. Japan is grappling with rising right-wing populism at home. There's also heightened unpredictability from its key ally, the United States. Shigeru Ishiba, who was elected to lead the governing Liberal Democratic Party just last September, he's barely been in office as Prime Minister for a year, he's now chosen to step down to prevent a split within the party. The LDP has ruled Japan for more than 60 out of the last 70 years. But now, Japan, which happens to be one of the world's most stable democracies, faces a political moment of reckoning. It's grappling with a host of pressing challenges. The foremost is its strained relationship with its chief ally, the United States. In the wider Asian region, it also has to contend with an increasingly assertive China. There's also stubborn economic woes that have alienated an entire generation of young people.
I was surprised because I knew him, I liked him, and he's just now stepping down. A little bit surprised. I found him to be a very nice man, actually. We dealt very well together.
The risk is that Japan returns to the politics of indecisiveness, the kind of revolving door of prime ministers like we saw in the 1990s and the early 2000s. Another possibility is that the centrist politics of the ruling LDP far more forcefully embraces far-right populism, which has been on the rise in Japan of late. In fact, two right-wing parties made significant gains in the recent parliamentary elections, leading the LDP to lose its parliamentary majority. Japan has been going through a period of unusually rapid change. Inflation, which had been almost zero for decades, is now high at 3%. Anti-foreigner sentiment is also surging. There's an influx of international workers and tourists because of the falling birth rates in Japan. Trade talks with the Trump administration have been unpredictable, and many Japanese, in fact, have felt betrayed by Trump after his tariff threats. In July, Prime Minister Ishiba's Liberal Democratic Party, which has ruled, like I said, for more than 60 out of the last 70 years, suffered a bruising defeat in parliamentary elections. Japanese voters rebuked the LDP for its handling of the economy, immigration, and trade relations with the Trump administration. There was also a political finance scandal and an ongoing shortage of rice. Rice happens to be the staple food in Japan. Ishiba's ruling coalition lost 19 out of the 60-odd seats which were up for re-election, as a result of which it ended up losing its majority in the upper house of the Japanese parliament. That defeat in July, along with an earlier blow which happened in a lower house election last October, left the Liberal Democrats a minority in both houses of the Diet, which is Japan's parliament. As voters turned to other parties, other far-right parties which made striking gains, particularly among young people. The biggest winners in July were two conservative parties, including one called Sansito, which was launched by a former English teacher who turned into a politician. In the end, Ishiba could not quell calls to step down from within his own party. On Sunday, he announced the painful decision to resign. He said he ultimately decided that he should take responsibility for the disastrous election results.
米国関税措置に関する交渉に一つの区切りがついた今こそがそのしかるべきタイミングであるこのように考え後進に道を譲る決断をいたしました。
The central question now is who will succeed Ishiba. LDP officials are expected to discuss this week how and when to hold a leadership election that will choose a future leader. The contenders include Shinjiro Koizumi. He's the agricultural minister. He's also the son of a popular ex-prime minister, Junichiro Koizumi. Then there is Sane Takaichi, who's a hardline conservative who was in fact endorsed by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated in 2022. Then there is Yoshimasa Hayashi, who's the chief cabinet secretary, who's seen as a close aide of Ishiba. Or it could be a surprise dark horse. But the candidates who are vying to succeed Shigeru Ishiba will face pressure to make the party more responsive to public concerns, particularly to younger voters. Given its minority position in both houses of parliament, the ruling party might also look for someone who has an ability to work with other parties. Overall, the LDP wants a leader who can help unify the party and also help it connect with the public, particularly young and urban voters. Voters are concerned about everyday struggles, including the high cost of living. The trade troubles with America also played a huge part. Ishiba's government spent months negotiating a trade deal with Washington that left Japanese exports with a 15% tariff across the board. Ishiba's government has had to deftly manage tensions with a rather mercurial Donald Trump since his re-election last year. Japan and the United States took more than 6 months to negotiate a trade deal, at the end of which Japanese exports had to pay a 15% tariff, similar to South Korea, but higher than the UK. Ishiba said that he had been thinking of resigning since the loss in the July election, but he was waiting for the right time given the ongoing trade negotiations. After Trump signed the executive order last week that fixed the tariffs on Japanese exports at 15%, Ishiba saw it as the right moment to step down, leaving his country in the throes of a major political vacuum. Thanks for watching Brass Tacks from the CNN-News18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions.
Genji group, they have did the movement in Nepal. They have told me that they believe on me and I can do government. They requested me and I accepted this one.
भारत से क्या उम्मीद करती हैं आप? और नेपाल में भी बहुत सारे भारतीय हैं जो अपनी सेफ्टी के लिए थोड़ा चिंतित हैं।
भारत से हम लोगों का रिश्ता आज नहीं है, बहुत दिनों से नेपाल की जनता और भारत के जनता के बीच में इतना अच्छा रिलेशन है। भारत ने सभी समय पर नेपाल को सहयोग किया है, मदद किया है।
Co-presented. This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
There's a stunning twist now to the ongoing legal battle over the 30,000 crore rupee estate of Sanjay Kapoor. WhatsApp chats and internal documents submitted to the Delhi High Court by Karishma Kapoor's children have unveiled explosive revelations. Among them is the startling suggestion that Sanjay Kapoor was allegedly arranging Portuguese citizenship for Karishma and her two children, a move that would require them to renounce Indian citizenship. The details embedded in private communications have sparked fresh speculation. Were Karishma and Sanjay considering a reconciliation before his demise? That's a big sensational revelation now coming to the forefront because of the WhatsApp chats that have been revealed in the public domain. Remember this on a day when Karishma Kapoor's two children, Samaira and Kian, have approached the Delhi High Court, this accusing their stepmother Priya Sachdev of in fact forging the will of their deceased father Sanjay Kapoor. And this is, remember, over an entire property worth 30,000 crore rupees. And in her defense, Priya Sachdev has maintained that there's already a trust that has been set up to take care of the two children.
Citizenship for both Karishma and their children. Would you like to comment on that? And secondly, on the 18th, when the body was being brought back to India, there was a motion moved for a board of directors meeting of Aureus Investments for inducting Ms. Priya Kapoor Sachdev on the board of directors. How do you respond to that?
It won't be appropriate for me to respond, so I will not be commenting on their personal relationship or what's been disclosed in the plaint or whether they were getting back together, not getting back together. That's not something that I can comment upon at all. So no comments, please.
So this was Mr. Vaibhav Gagar, who was speaking to us after, in fact, the Delhi High Court today issued summons in the suit that's been filed by Karishma Kapoor's children with regards to the family feud that has erupted in the Kapoor family after the mysterious death of business tycoon Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, a 30,000 crore worth of empire.
All right, let me quickly go across to Ananya Bhatnagar, who's been reporting on that story with us. Ananya, even though the lawyers have not really revealed much, if you could share with us what has in fact emerged out of these screenshots of the WhatsApp chat.
But you know, if you go by these screenshots, it clearly shows how Sanjay Kapoor was actually seeking, in fact, a family reunification in Portugal. And in fact, it's clear from the application that he had filed for his children from Ms. Karishma Kapoor, seeking a Portuguese citizenship. In fact, if we go by the WhatsApp chat of this family group called the Family K, it only has members which are Karishma Kapoor, Sanjay Kapoor, and in fact the two children from Karishma Kapoor. No Priya Sachdev Kapoor, no children from Priya Sachdev Kapoor or anybody else was there on that particular WhatsApp group. And we can see that how he was pushing, in fact, Karishma Kapoor as well as to push for a Portuguese citizenship, giving her a highlight as to if at all she takes a Portuguese citizenship, then she has to lose her Indian citizenship itself. So which basically hints out that, whether there were ties that were being mended as far as, Sanjay Kapoor and Karishma Kapoor are concerned. And a second similar thing that emerges out from the annexures of this particular suit is that when Sanjay's body was being brought back to India, in fact, from the United Kingdom after his unfortunate death on the 12th of June, on the 18th of June, a motion was actually moved for a board of directors meeting of, AIS or the investments company wherein, in fact, Sanjay Kapoor was the director along with Dinesh Agarwal. These two people were the board, and this new board meeting was being called after Sanjay's death, even before his cremation took place, in order to induct Ms. Priya Sachdev Kapoor on the board of directors of Arius Investments Limited. And that is something, that raises different angles as far as this 30,000 crores worth of family feud is concerned. As far as the arguments that took place before the court is concerned, it was highlighted by Mr. Mahesh Jethmalani, who was appearing for the two children that the will that has been executed, the will of their father which has been executed here, is something that seems to be forged. It was read in a haste in that particular meeting at the Taj Hotel, and there seems to be suspicious circumstances because there was no talk of the will until that particular meeting at the Taj Hotel took place. The executor of the will and Priya Sajdev Kapoor have taken a defense that this will was something that came up to them through Mr. Dinesh Agarwal, who's said to be in fact one of the directors of Arias Investments Limited, and also is somebody who is a witness to this particular will itself.
So it's interesting, Ananya, that you highlight that this is, on one side you have Priya's version. On the other hand, you've also in fact spoken to Sanjay Kapoor's sister. What is it that you're learning with regards to the other side of the family, whether it is Sanjay Kapoor's sister or the mother, remember, who were at the forefront of those allegations that surfaced with regards to Priya Sajdev in fact forging the family will?
We had spoken to, in fact, Ms. Mandira Kapoor Smith a few weeks ago when this whole family feud had actually broken out. And she, as far as Karishma Kapoor is concerned, had stated that they are having good terms with Karishma Kapoor. She's somebody who's held the family together, the two grandchildren of Ms. Rani Kapoor, which is Samaira and the other one from Karishma Kapoor, who have now filed this plaint before the Delhi High Court. All of them speak in one line that, this is a will that is forged in nature. And it is by Priya Sajdev Kapoor and people associated with Priya Sajdev Kapoor in order to take control of the Sonacom star and the 30,000 crore worth of empire that Mr.
CNN News 18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions.
We're live from the CNN News 18 Primetime Studio, brought to you by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions. Viewers, look at those pictures. They were from a time ago when things were great between India and the United States. But viewers, the tone is changing. It has moderated noticeably after relations hit a trough. US President Donald Trump has sent a second message to Prime Minister Modi, full of endearments and without a trace of the bitterness that we've heard before. This morning, very early in the morning, India time around 3 a.m., he expressed optimism that he and his good friend Modi would get on a call very soon and firm up a trade deal for both our countries. Without getting carried away, as Trump is fickle and unreliable, the fact that he has emphasized on the word both